He poured himself a scotch, laughed in her face, and called their unborn baby an anchor. He told her she was invisible. He said she shopped at Goodwill by the pound. He handed her divorce papers and told security to never let her back in the building. She was 7 months pregnant, standing in the rain, crying on a sidewalk, while hundreds of people walked past without stopping. He thought he had just cut loose dead weight. He thought he was finally free to live the life he deserved with his gorgeous new girlfriend. He had no idea that the woman he just threw away like yesterday's newspaper owned the bank that held his mortgage. He did not know that her family's fortune was not measured in millions, not in billions, in trillions with a T. He did not know that the settlement he was so proud of, the one he called generous, would not cover the fuel bill for her private jet for a single month. And he definitely did not know about the clause buried in their prenup, the one he never bothered to read, that would have made him worth $500 million if he had just been kind. This is the story of how Bennett Caldwell signed his own destruction with a smile on his face, and how the quiet woman he mocked in a cheap sweater turned out to be the most powerful person he would ever meet. This story carries a truth that never gets old. The way you treat people when you think they have nothing to offer you reveals exactly who you are. And kindness is never wasted, because you never truly know who is standing in front of you. If that hook just grabbed you, trust me, the story only gets more intense from here. Drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever been underestimated by someone who later regretted it? I want to hear your story. Hit that like button so more people can find this video. And if you are new here, subscribe and tap that bell because we drop stories like this every single week. Now settle in. This one is going to stay with you for a long time. The ink had not even dried on the divorce papers before he started laughing. Bennett Caldwell sat behind his desk on the 42nd floor of the Caldwell and Associates building in downtown Chicago, and he felt like a king finally shedding the weight that had been dragging him down for 5 miserable years. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the city lights into impressionistic streaks of gold and white. The office smelled of imported leather, expensive cologne, and the kind of arrogance that only comes from a man who believes he has outsmarted everyone in the room. His desk was a slab of Italian marble that cost more than the average American sedan. Behind him, a bottle of Macallan 25 sat on the sidebar like a trophy. The quarterly projections glowed on his screen, numbers climbing in a way that made his chest swell with pride. The Donovan merger was weeks away. The media was calling him a rising star of fintech, and in approximately 90 seconds, the last remaining obstacle to his perfect life was going to sign her name and disappear forever. Ellison stood by the door. She was 7 months pregnant. She wore a maternity sweater that had been washed so many times the fabric was nearly translucent at the elbows, and a pair of old jeans that were practical but not fashionable. Her ankles were swollen, dark circles sat heavy under her eyes, the kind that come from weeks of sleepless nights spent crying into a pillow while your husband sleeps in the guest room with his phone on silent. She carried a worn canvas tote bag over one shoulder. To the casual observer, she looked like a tired kindergarten teacher. To Bennett, she looked like a mistake he had made in his 20s that he was finally about to correct. He did not look up when she entered. He kept his eyes fixed on his screen, making a performance of how little her presence mattered. He let her stand there, pregnant and exhausted, for a full 30 seconds before he spoke. "Papers are on the credenza, Ellison," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced, completely devoid of warmth. "I have already signed. I just need your scribble, and you can go. I have been generous. You get the suburb apartment and the Honda. Try not to have the baby in it. Ellison walked slowly to the credenza. Her movements were deliberate. She did not look angry. She did not look sad. She looked like a woman who had already mourned this marriage in private and was now simply attending the funeral. She picked up the pen. Then she paused. "Bennett," she said softly, "can we at least talk about this? Not for me, for the baby." Bennett stood up from his chair. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke suit and walked around the desk toward her. He looked at her pregnant belly with an expression that was not love, not concern, not even indifference. It was contempt. "That baby is your anchor, not mine," he said. "I told you not to get pregnant. You did it on purpose, to trap me into staying." "Well, congratulations. It did not work. My lawyer says I can contest paternity after it is born. Sienna thinks it might not even be mine." The words landed like a physical blow. Ellison placed one hand on her belly, an instinctive, protective gesture. She whispered, "You know this baby is yours, Bennett." Bennett walked to the minibar and poured himself a double shot of scotch. He swirled the amber liquid in the crystal tumbler, watching the light play through it. He was enjoying this, every second of it. "Sign the papers, Ellison. Go back to whatever it is you do all day. Clipping coupons, knitting socks, watching those reality shows you love so much." He took a sip and let the burn settle in his chest. "I need a wife who fits the life I am building. The Donovan merger closes next month. Do you know what that means? It means galas in Zurich. It means dinners with senators. I cannot have a wife who looks like she shops by the pound at Goodwill, standing next to me at a black tie event. It is bad for the brand." He set the glass down and looked at her with the kind of pity a man reserves for a stray dog he has decided not to feed. "You are invisible, Ellison. You have always been invisible." Ellison looked at him. She searched his eyes for any trace of the man she had married 5 years ago. The man who had been hungry and ambitious, yes, but who had also been kind. The man who had proposed to her in a rainstorm outside a diner in Lincoln Park because he could not afford a restaurant. The man who had cried when she told him she was proud of him the day he passed the bar. That man was gone. In his place stood a stranger wearing an expensive suit and an ugly smile. "You are right, Bennett," she whispered. "I do not fit in your world." Finally, he muttered. She uncapped the pen. For a moment she hesitated, not out of love, not out of hope, out of a final ethical pause, a last chance for the universe to intervene. It did not. She signed her name, Ellison Gray. The scratch of the pen against paper seemed to echo through the silent office like a door closing forever. She placed the pen down gently. "It is done," she said. Bennett strode over and snatched the papers. He checked the signature carefully, as if he expected her to trick him. Then he smiled, the wide, self-satisfied smile of a man who believes he has just won the game of his life. "Perfect. My lawyer will wire the settlement funds to your account within 48 hours. Try not to spend it all on diapers and cat food." He turned his back on her and returned to his window, looking out at the city he felt he owned. The rain had lightened slightly, and the skyline sparkled like a promise meant only for him. "You can leave your key on the desk on your way out. And Ellison, yes, do not come back. The security downstairs has been updated. You will not be on the list." Ellison walked to the marble desk. She placed her house key down with a soft clink. She looked at the back of his head one last time. "Goodbye, Bennett. I hope the view is worth it." She turned and walked out of the office. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her with a sound that was quiet and final, like the last page of a book being closed. Bennett raised his glass to his reflection in the rain-streaked window. To freedom, he toasted himself. And to upgrading. He took a long, satisfied sip. He was already thinking about the penthouse he would share with Sienna, about the Donovan merger and the media interviews that would follow, about the galas and the private jets and the life he had always deserved. He had no idea, not the faintest shadow of a clue, that the settlement he was so proud of, the one he considered so generous, was less than the interest Ellison's family earned in a single hour. He did not know that the woman who had just walked out of his office, wearing a stretched sweater and carrying a canvas tote bag, was the sole heir to a dynasty worth $2.8 trillion. He did not know that she owned the bank that held his mortgage. He did not know that by signing those papers, mocking her as she left, and toasting himself in the reflection of a window he could barely afford, he had just made the most expensive mistake in the history of American finance. But he was about to find out. Ellison walked out of the Caldwell and Associates building and into the rain. She did not open an umbrella. She did not have one. She had left it in the apartment that was no longer hers, in the closet of a life that had just been erased with a signature and a smirk. She simply stepped through the revolving door and let the cold November rain hit her face, her hair, her swollen belly, all of it, as if the water could wash away 5 years of pretending to be less than she was. She stood on the curb. The busy Chicago traffic rushed past, taxis honking, buses hissing, the whole machinery of a city that did not care about one pregnant woman standing alone in a downpour. A passing car splashed dirty water onto her jeans. She did not flinch. She placed both hands on her belly. The baby kicked, a sharp, insistent thump against her palm, as if to say, "I am still here. It is just us now, little one," Ellison whispered. Her voice broke on the last word. "But I promise you something. You will never, not for one single day of your life, feel unwanted. Do you hear me? You are wanted. You are loved. And your mama is going to make sure the world knows it." The tears came then. Not the polite, contained tears she had trained herself to produce in front of Bennett, the kind that made her look weak enough to satisfy his ego. These were real, deep. The tears of a woman who had spent 5 years hiding who she was so that a man might love her for herself, only to discover that the man had never loved her at all. He had loved the idea of having someone beneath him, someone to look down on, someone to make him feel tall. She sobbed on the sidewalk, a pregnant woman in a stretch sweater, crying in the rain on Michigan Avenue. Hundreds of people walked past. Not one of them stopped. And let us pause here for a moment. Because every single one of us has been in a place like this. Maybe not on a rain-soaked curb in Chicago, maybe not 7 months pregnant, but we have all stood in that lonely place where someone we loved made us feel like we were nothing, where we gave our best and our best was not enough, where we looked for kindness in someone's eyes and found only cold indifference. If you have ever been there, then you already know what Ellison was feeling, and you already know what comes next, because women who have been broken like that do not stay broken. They reassemble, and when they do, they come back sharper than before. Her phone rang. The cracked screen lit up with a name that made her close her eyes in relief. Maggie. Margaret Holloway. 55 years old, former college professor turned bakery owner, a woman built from Southern steel and buttercream frosting, who had exactly zero tolerance for nonsense and an infinite capacity for love. She was the only person in Chicago who knew the truth about Ellison Gray. Not the kindergarten teacher truth, the real truth. Ellison answered with a shaking hand. "Honey?" Maggie's voice came through warm and fierce. Did he do it? Did that sorry excuse of a man actually go through with it? Ellison could barely speak. He said the baby might not be his, Maggie. He said, I trapped him. He called our baby an anchor. The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 2 seconds. When Maggie spoke again, her voice had dropped to the register she reserved for moments of absolute moral clarity. Lord have mercy on his soul, because I will not. You listen to me, Ellison Gray. You are not what that man says you are. You spent 5 years wearing thrift store sweaters and driving a Honda Civic so you could find out if one man on this earth could love you without a price tag. That is not weakness, honey. That is the bravest thing I have ever seen a woman do. And it is over now. It is time to stop hiding. I am scared, Maggie, Ellison said. The rain ran down her face, mixing with her tears until she could not tell which was which. Not of being alone. I am scared of who I become if I use what I have. Then do not use it for revenge, Maggie said firmly. Use it for that little girl in your belly. She deserves a mama who stands tall. She deserves to grow up knowing that her mother did not crumble when the world tried to crush her. You hear me? I hear you. Good. Now where are you? Are you still standing in the rain like a fool? I am on the curb outside his building. Well, get off that curb. You're going to catch pneumonia, and I am going to have to come down there and drag your billion-dollar behind into a warm car myself. Despite everything, Ellison almost smiled, almost. And then the car arrived. It did not pull up the way a taxi pulls up, with squealing brakes and a honking horn. It glided to the curb like a ship docking in a harbor, silent, immense, inevitable. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom 8, extended wheelbase, painted in a shade of midnight blue so deep it looked black. The windows were tinted to the point of opacity. In the financial district of Chicago, luxury cars were common. But a Phantom of this caliber, with diplomatic flags on the fender and an aura of old-world power that seemed to bend the light around it, was something else entirely. Pedestrians stopped on the sidewalk and stared. A woman in a business suit actually lowered her umbrella to get a better look. The rear door opened from the inside. A man stepped out. He was in his early 60s, tall, with a military posture so rigid it looked like his spine had been replaced with a steel rod. He wore a suit that cost more than Bennett's entire office fit out, though you would never know it because the man wearing it did not care about fashion. He cared about precision. His face was grave but kind, the face of a man who had spent decades protecting someone he considered family. He held a large black umbrella. He opened it and stepped forward, shielding Ellison completely from the rain before a single additional drop could touch her. Mrs. Caldwell, he began, then corrected himself with immediate precision. Miss Gray, my apologies. Old habits. Ellison looked at him. The tears were still wet on her cheeks, but something in her eyes shifted when she saw him. The despair did not vanish, but it moved aside to make room for something else. Recognition, relief, and the faintest beginning of resolve. Hello, Arthur. You are right on time. Arthur Pendleton, 62 years old, head of private security and legal counsel for the Covenant Gray Trust. Former military intelligence, 23 years of service to the Gray family. He had watched Ellison grow up. He had taught her to ride a bicycle on the grounds of the family estate in Geneva when she was 6. He had stood at the back of the church at her wedding to Bennett and said nothing, though his silence that day had been louder than a scream. He held the umbrella over her with the steady hand of a man who would stand in a hurricane if she asked him to. The board has been notified of the signature, he said. His voice was low, calm, the kind of voice that delivers world-altering news the same way it orders coffee. The trust is fully unlocked. Your grandmother was notified 7 minutes ago. She sends her love and asked me to tell you, and I quote, "It is about damn time." Grandmother is always dramatic, Ellison said, but she said it with a warmth that cracked through her grief like sunlight through storm clouds. She stepped into the car. The interior hit her with a wave of warmth that she felt in her bones. The scent of jasmine and aged wood surrounded her. The leather seats were softer than anything in the apartment she had shared with Bennett, which she supposed was ironic, given that this car cost more than the apartment building. Arthur closed her door, walked around to the front passenger seat, and settled in beside the driver with the efficiency of a man who had performed this routine 1,000 times. As the car pulled away from the curb and merged silently into traffic, Arthur turned to face her through the partition. "We have taken the liberty of retrieving your personal items from the suburban residence. They are being transported to the penthouse at the St. Regis as we speak. Is there anything else you require from your former life?" Ellison watched the Caldwell building shrink in the rain-streaked rear window. 42 floors of glass and ambition, a monument to Bennett's ego. She felt nothing. No longing, no regret. Just the strange, hollow lightness of finally setting down a weight she had been carrying for half a decade. "No, Arthur. Nothing." Arthur nodded. Then his tone shifted, dropping an octave into the register he used for operational briefings. "Regarding Mr. Caldwell, we completed the financial audit you requested 6 months ago. The results are comprehensive and, I must say, deeply unflattering. He is insolvent, Miss Gray, completely insolvent. He has been embezzling from the Caldwell and Associates employee pension fund to cover the lease payments on his Ferrari and the renovation of his office. He has hidden over $14 million in losses inside shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. He has 3 offshore accounts he has not declared to the Internal Revenue Service. He is borrowing from one creditor to pay another, and he genuinely believes that the merger with the Donovan Group will save him from all of it." Ellison closed her eyes. She rested her hands on her belly and felt Charlotte kick again. Stronger this time. "He stole from his own employees," she said quietly, "from their retirement. Yes, Miss Gray, 63 individuals. Some of them are within 2 years of retirement age. They have no idea their pensions have been gutted." Ellison was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different. The grief was still there, but it had been joined by something harder, something with edges. "Arthur, before we do anything else, I want those employees protected. I want every dollar restored to the pension fund. Quietly, no press, no credit. They should never know it was at risk. Already in motion, Miss Gray. Your grandmother authorized the transfer this morning. The funds will be restored by the end of business tomorrow." Ellison opened her eyes. Arthur saw them clearly in the rearview mirror and noted, with the professional detachment of a man who has served this family for over 2 decades, that they were no longer the soft, passive eyes Bennett Caldwell was accustomed to seeing. They were clear, cold, brilliant. The eyes of a woman who had been trained since birth to manage a dynasty worth $2.8 trillion, and who had simply been choosing not to. "Take me to the airport," Ellison said. "The jet is fueled for Geneva. Grandmother and I have a great deal to discuss. But first, call the board. Tell them Aurora Holdings is about to make an acquisition." "Yes, Miss Gray? And Arthur?" "Nobody at Caldwell and Associates learns who is behind Aurora. Not yet. Not until I am ready. I want Bennett to feel the walls closing in without having any idea who is building them." Arthur allowed himself the smallest of smiles. It was the smile of a chess master who has just been told to set up the board. "Understood, Miss Gray." Complete operational silence. The Rolls-Royce glided through the Chicago traffic like a shark through dark water. Behind the tinted windows, Ellison Gray pulled a phone from her tote bag. It was not the cracked smartphone she carried around Bennett. It was a secure satellite device with no brand markings, encrypted to military specifications. She dialed a single number. "It is done," she said into the receiver. Her voice was steady now. The tears were gone. In their place was the voice of a woman who had just stopped pretending. "Initiate the acquisition of Caldwell and Associates through Aurora Holdings. Full audit, full restructuring plan, and tell the board I am coming home." She ended the call and looked out the window at the city lights blurring past. Somewhere up there, on the 42nd floor of a building she could buy with her pocket change, Bennett Caldwell was pouring himself another scotch and toasting his own reflection. He thought he had just freed himself from a burden. He had no idea he had just released a storm. 3 weeks later, Bennett Caldwell felt like a god. The divorce had been finalized with record speed, thanks to what his lawyers called the most cooperative, opposing party they had ever encountered. Ellison had not contested a single line of the settlement. She had taken the suburban apartment, the Honda Civic, and a lump sum that Bennett considered generous, but that would not have covered the fuel bill for Ellison's family jet for a single month. She had signed everything, taken everything, and vanished so completely that Bennett sometimes wondered if she had ever existed at all. Good riddance, he told himself every morning while knotting his tie in the mirror. Dead weight, anchor, gone. Sienna Drake had moved into the penthouse suite at the Ritz-Carlton within days of the divorce being finalized. She had redecorated it in shades of white and gold, which she said projected power and sophistication. Bennett paid for all of it on credit, which he planned to pay off with the Donovan merger bonus. The numbers were astronomical. Low 8 figures just for the signing bonus, with stock options that could push him into the hundreds of millions once the company went public. He was on the cover of 3 financial magazines. "Rising Star of FinTech," the headlines read, "Caldwell to revolutionize mobile banking." He had given interviews to Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal. He had been invited to speak at a tech conference in Davos. The world was bending toward him, like a flower following the sun. On this particular evening, 3 weeks after the divorce, Bennett sat in the private dining room of Les Bernardins in New York City. Across from him, Sienna glowed under the candlelight. She wore a red dress that left strategic amounts to the imagination, diamond earrings that caught every flicker of flame, and an expression of satisfied hunger that Bennett mistook for love, but that was actually something much colder. "To us," Sienna said, raising her champagne flute, "and to the Donovan deal. I heard the signing bonus alone is going to be 8 figures. Low 8 figures, Bennett corrected, with a modesty so false it practically winked. But the real money is in the stock options. Once we go public, we are talking hundreds of millions. We will be royalty, Sienna, actual American royalty." Sienna clinked her glass against his. "I have already been looking at summer homes in the Hamptons, and maybe a chalet in Aspen for the winter. Oh, and Bennett, we absolutely need to get on the list for the Met Gala next year. I will not take no for an answer." "Consider it done," Bennett said, cutting into his lobster with the confidence of a man who believes he will never eat anything less expensive for the rest of his life. Sienna took a sip of champagne and smiled, but it was not the warm, giddy smile of a woman in love. It was the smile of a woman reviewing her investment portfolio and finding the returns satisfactory. Because here is what Bennett did not understand about Sienna Drake, and what the audience needs to understand right now. Sienna was not a mistress. She was an architect. She had identified Bennett Caldwell 18 months ago as a perfect target, a man with a growing company, a fragile ego, and a wife who would be easy to displace. She had studied Ellison for months before making her move, cataloging every vulnerability, every insecurity, every pressure point. She knew that Ellison was quiet. She knew that Ellison would not fight. She knew that if Bennett was given the right words, at the right time, he would drive Ellison out without Sienna ever having to get her hands dirty, and she had given him every word, the anchor line, the invisible line, the goodwill line, every cruel phrase Bennett had spoken during the divorce, every cutting remark that had made Ellison flinch, had been written by Sienna Drake and rehearsed over pillow talk until Bennett delivered them as naturally as if they were his own thoughts. Now, watching him preen over his lobster, Sienna allowed herself a moment of private satisfaction. "I told you, babe," she said, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. "Get rid of her before the third trimester." After the baby comes, courts get sympathetic. Pregnant women get everything. Judges love a crying mother. We needed her gone fast, broken and in tears, so she would not have the energy to fight the settlement. "You were right," Bennett said. She just signed, did not even argue, did not bring a lawyer, did not ask for more money. She just signed and left. Easiest divorce in the history of matrimonial law. Sienna shrugged, but her eyes were sharp. Of course she did not argue. "I gave you the script, Bennett. I studied that woman for months. I knew exactly where to cut. Women like her, the quiet ones, the ones who hide behind kindness and cardigan sweaters. They do not fight. They fold. You just have to hit the right nerve." Bennett raised his glass. "Well, here's to your script." It worked perfectly. They clinked again. The champagne was a vintage that cost $400 a bottle. Bennett put it on the company card. "Oh," Bennett said, spearing an asparagus tip. "I almost forgot to mention. I am meeting with a new investor group tomorrow morning. Aurora Holdings. They appeared out of nowhere, based in Zurich and Singapore, very exclusive, very private. They want to inject capital into the post-merger entity. My broker says they have been watching my career for 5 years. They think I am a visionary." Aurora Holdings. Sienna frowned slightly. "I have not heard of them. That is because they do not advertise, babe. This is private equity at the highest level. They do not come to you unless you are exceptional. They found me, not the other way around." Sienna filed the name away in her mind, but said nothing more. She had learned early in life that the best way to control a man was to let him believe every good idea was his own. Bennett's phone buzzed on the white tablecloth. An unknown number. He glanced at Sienna. "Ignore it," she said. "It might be the Donovan team," Bennett replied, picking up the phone. "Caldwell here." A voice came through the speaker. It was male, deep, and distorted slightly, as if the connection were poor or the caller was using some kind of digital masking. "Mr. Caldwell, this is regarding your meeting with Aurora Holdings tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. "Yes, I am confirmed." "Who is this?" "This is a courtesy call. The CEO of Aurora will be attending the meeting personally. She rarely attends preliminary meetings. You should consider this significant. Be prepared." Bennett felt a jolt of electricity. The CEO was coming in person for a preliminary meeting. That meant they were serious. That meant big money, potentially enormous money. The CEO. That is fantastic. What is her name? I will have my team run a background brief. There was a pause on the other end, a silence that felt heavier than it should have. "The CEO is not a he, Mr. Caldwell. And she does not require a brief. She knows everything about you. Just bring your A game." Another pause. "And Mr. Caldwell? One more thing. Yes, wear the blue tie. The one you wore to your wedding. She likes nostalgia." The line went dead. Bennett stared at the phone for a long moment. His brow furrowed. Then he laughed shook his head, and set the phone down. Weird, he said. What? Sienna asked, reapplying her lipstick in a compact mirror. The investor. The CEO is coming personally. A woman, and she gave me fashion advice, told me to wear my wedding tie. Sienna raised an eyebrow. Eccentric billionaires. They all love their little power plays. Who cares, as long as the check clears? Bennett nodded and returned to his lobster. He did not wear the blue tie the next morning. He chose a red power tie instead. Nobody was going to dictate his wardrobe. He was Bennett Caldwell. He made the rules. He had no idea that the woman on the other end of that phone call knew more about his finances than he did. She knew about the Cayman Islands. She knew about the pension fund. She knew about the Ferrari lease and the inflated revenue projections and the fact that without the Donovan merger, his company would be bankrupt within 90 days. She knew all of this because she owned the company that had audited every line. And she was his wife. His ex-wife, rather. The one in the cheap sweater. The one who clipped coupons. The invisible one. The one who was worth $2.8 trillion. The morning of the meeting, Ellison stood at the window of the St. Regis penthouse and watched Chicago wake up. She was 8 months pregnant now. The baby was active today, turning and kicking with a restless energy that Ellison had come to interpret as her daughter's way of saying, I am ready. Let us go. The penthouse was on the 48th floor, higher than Bennett's office, by a comfortable margin, and the view stretched from the lake to the western suburbs in an unbroken panorama of steel and glass. The apartment itself was a study in quiet elegance, no marble desk, no imported Italian, anything. Just warm wood, soft lighting, a wall of books, and a kitchen that smelled like the chamomile tea Arthur had insisted she drink every morning since the divorce. Baby clothes were folded neatly on the back of the living room chair. An ultrasound photo was pinned to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a tiny giraffe. It was the apartment of a woman who had more money than most nations, but who measured her wealth in different currencies. She was on a video call with grandmother Catherine in Geneva. Catherine Gray was 84 years old. She sat in a leather wingback chair in the library of the family estate overlooking Lake Geneva, a cup of Earl Grey balanced on her knee, and a shawl around her shoulders that was older than most of the furniture in Bennett's office. Her white hair was swept back in a style that had not changed in 40 years, and her eyes, behind gold-rimmed spectacles, were the color of a winter lake and twice as sharp. She had built the Gray Empire, not inherited it, built it. Her late husband, Ellison's grandfather, had started with a single fishing boat during the Great Depression. Catherine had turned that boat into a fleet, the fleet into a shipping line, the shipping line into a global enterprise that now controlled significant interests in maritime transport, rare earth mining, and, ironically, the very banking software infrastructure that Bennett's little company was trying to imitate. She was worth $2.8 trillion. She wore a $30 shawl. She did not see the contradiction. The board is ready, Catherine said. Her voice was clear and commanding despite her age. Arthur's team has completed the audit. The question is, Ellison, what do you want? Revenge or justice? I need you to be very clear with me, because they are not the same thing. Ellison sat down slowly in the chair across from the screen. She rested her hands on her belly. He stole from his own employees, grandmother, their retirement fund, 63 people who showed up every day and worked hard and trusted him. Some of them are 2 years from retirement. They have no idea that the money they were counting on does not exist anymore. That is not about me. That is about them. Catherine studied her granddaughter's face for a long moment. Then she nodded. Good. Lead with that. When you lead with justice, The personal satisfaction takes care of itself. Your grandfather always said that. After the call ended, Ellison sat alone in the quiet apartment. The city hummed, 48 floors below. The baby kicked. She placed both hands on her stomach and spoke to her daughter the way she had been speaking to her for months, quietly, honestly, as if the child could already understand. Your daddy does not want us, Charlotte. That is what I am going to call you, Charlotte Catherine Gray, after the strongest woman I know. And I am going to make sure you never need anyone's approval to know what you are worth. Not a man's approval, not the world's approval, not even mine. You are going to know it in your bones, baby girl, because your mama learned the hard way what happens when you let someone else decide your value. She felt Charlotte kick again, 3 times in rapid succession, like a heartbeat. Ellison wiped her eyes and picked up her phone. She called Maggie. Maggie, I am scared again. Of what, honey? Maggie's voice was warm and immediate. The way it always was, as if she had been sitting by the phone waiting for exactly this call. That I will enjoy it. Maggie laughed. It was a full, rich Southern laugh that could have melted butter at 40 paces. Honey, if you enjoy it a little bit, that is just the Lord's sense of humor. Now go get him. 2 hours later, Bennett Caldwell walked into the conference room of the Four Seasons Hotel in New York City. The room was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, a mahogany table that could seat 20 fresh flowers on the sideboard, and the kind of hushed, carpeted silence that whispers, "Important things happen here." Bennett wore his red power tie. He had ignored the mysterious caller's suggestion about the blue one. Nobody dictated his wardrobe. He was Bennett Caldwell. He set the trends. The room was empty except for a single man standing by the window with his hands clasped behind his back. Arthur Pendleton turned to face him. He was not wearing the dark suit he had worn at the curb outside the Caldwell building 3 weeks ago. Today he wore a charcoal, 3-piece suit with a pocket watch chain and cufflinks that were older than Bennett's entire career. He looked like he had stepped out of a portrait hanging in a gentleman's club that Bennett would never be invited to join. Bennett did not recognize him. He had never seen Arthur before. The day Ellison left the building, Bennett had been 42 floors up, toasting his reflection. He had not looked down at the curb. "Mr. Caldwell," Arthur said, "please have a seat." "I am here to see the CEO of Aurora Holdings," Bennett said, checking his watch with performative impatience. "I am a busy man. The CEO sends her regrets. Her jet from Monaco encountered headwinds. I am the authorized liaison. My name is Arthur." Bennett sat down with a huff. "Fine. Let us talk numbers. I am looking for a $50 million injection for a 10% equity stake. Non-negotiable." Arthur smiled. It was the kind of smile that a shark might give a seal, just before the water turns red. "We are prepared to offer 100 million, Arthur said. Bennett's eyes went wide. 100 million? For what percentage? 51%. Bennett laughed. It was a genuine laugh. The laugh of a man who thinks he has just heard a joke. "You are joking. I am not selling my company. This is a partnership, not a takeover." "It is not a takeover, Mr. Caldwell." Arthur reached beneath the table and produced a thick file. He slid it across the polished mahogany with a single smooth motion. "It is a rescue." Bennett opened the file. The smile on his face died so quickly, it was as if someone had reached into his skull and switched off the light behind his eyes. Inside the file were photocopies of his private financial ledgers, the ones he kept in a locked drawer in his home office, the ones that showed the real numbers, not the ones he presented to the Donovan Group or the board, the hidden debts, the creative accounting, the shell companies in the Cayman Islands. the embezzled pension fund, the offshore accounts he had never declared to the IRS. Everything. Every lie, every theft, every fraud, documented with the kind of forensic precision that suggested whoever had compiled this file had access to resources that Bennett could not even imagine. "Where did you get these?" Bennett hissed. His face had gone the color of old milk. "Aurora Holdings is very thorough," Arthur said calmly. "We know you are insolvent, Bennett. Completely and irreversibly insolvent. If the Donovan Group sees this file, the merger is dead. If the SEC sees this file, you will be investigated for fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. If the FBI sees this file, you will go to prison. The question is not whether your world ends, Mr. Caldwell. The question is whether it ends with a whimper or a bang." Bennett felt sweat trickling down his spine. "Who are you people?" "We are the only thing standing between you and a federal indictment," Arthur said. He folded his hands on the table with the patience of a man who has all the time in the world and knows it. "The terms are straightforward. Aurora Holdings acquires 51% of Caldwell and Associates. We inject $100 million in new capital. We clean up the books, pay down the debts, restore the pension fund, and make the Donovan merger viable. You stay on as the public face of the company. You keep your title, you keep your office, but you answer to the CEO of Aurora Holdings, and every major decision requires her approval." Bennett stared at the file. His mind was racing, spinning through options like a rat in a maze, looking for any exit that did not lead to a dead end. "Who is the CEO?" he demanded. "I want to meet her. I am not signing anything until I know who I am dealing with." Arthur gathered the documents and returned them to the file with deliberate care. "The CEO will reveal herself when she is ready, Mr. Caldwell, not when you demand it. That is not how this works. For now, you have 48 hours to sign the restructuring agreement. If you do not, this file goes to the FBI by courier at 9 a.m. on Thursday." He stood and walked to the door. Then he paused and turned back. "One more thing. The CEO asked me to pass along a message. She said, 'True wealth does not shout, it whispers.' She said you would not understand what that means. She hopes that one day you will." Arthur left the room. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Bennett sat alone at the mahogany table, staring at the space where the file had been. The walls of his kingdom were crumbling, and he could not even see who was swinging the hammer. He signed the restructuring agreement the next morning at 7:15 a.m. He used the same pen he had used to sign his divorce papers. He still did not know who owned Aurora Holdings. He would find out in 3 days at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible place, in front of 500 of the most powerful people in Chicago. And it would be the kind of reveal that people talk about for decades. The Donovan Gala was the event of the Chicago social season. Held in the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton, it was a sea of black ties, designer gowns, and the kind of practiced laughter that sounds like wind chimes made of money. 500 guests filled the room, every one of them wealthy, connected, or desperate to appear both. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from a ceiling painted with gold leaf murals. Waiters in white jackets moved through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne that cost more per glass than a school teacher earned in an hour. The air was thick with expensive perfume, political gossip, and the faint electrical hum of ambition. Bennett Caldwell stood near the ice sculpture, which had been carved into the shape of the Donovan Group logo, a $12,000 centerpiece that would be a puddle by midnight. He held a glass of tonic water with lime. He had wanted scotch. He had wanted scotch very badly. But Arthur had called him exactly 1 hour before the event and informed him, in a tone that allowed no negotiation, that the new management preferred a sober CEO at all public functions. Bennett had opened his mouth to argue and then remembered the file. He drank his tonic water in silence. Beside him, Sienna Drake was vibrating with anticipation. She wore a neon canary yellow gown with a plunging neckline that drew every eye in the room, though not necessarily for the reason she hoped. The dress was tight, bright, and aggressively expensive, the kind of outfit that announced its wearer's presence from 300 feet away and dared anyone to look elsewhere. Her diamond earrings, which Bennett had purchased on credit, caught every available photon of chandelier light and redistributed it across her collarbones like scattered fire. She was scanning the room with the intensity of a general surveying a battlefield. Photographers, senators, magazine editors. She had a mental checklist, and she was working through it. "This is our night, Bennett," she whispered, squeezing his arm. "The merger announcement. Everyone who matters is here. Stop looking so nervous. You look like you are waiting for an execution." Bennett forced a smile. He adjusted his tie, read again, and straightened his shoulders. "Did you ever find out who the Aurora CEO is? The woman I signed with?" Sienna shook her head. "No, nobody has. She is a ghost. No social media, no press appearances, no photographs. My contacts in Zurich say the name Gray comes up in connection with the parent trust, but it could be anyone. There are a dozen Grays in global finance." Bennett frowned. "Gray," he repeated. The name tugged at something in the back of his mind, but the connection did not form. It floated for a moment, like a word on the tip of his tongue, then dissolved. "Who cares?" Sienna said, taking a sip of her martini. "The money cleared. That is all that matters. Now come on. Robert Donovan is over by the bar. We need to say hello before dinner." They had taken 3 steps toward the bar when the room changed. It was not a sudden silence. It was subtler than that. A shift in frequency, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the birds stop singing and the air goes thick and electric. Conversations did not stop. They lowered. Heads did not snap around. They turned slowly, drawn by a force that was felt before it was seen. The massive double doors at the top of the grand staircase had opened. Bennett turned with the crowd. Beside him, Sienna rose onto her tiptoes in her stilettos, craning her neck. Robert Donovan, who had been mid-sentence with a state senator, stopped talking and set down his drink. He began walking toward the staircase with a pace and a posture that Bennett had never seen him adopt before. It was reverence. Pure, undiluted reverence. At the top of the stairs, bathed in the warm golden light of the ballroom's chandeliers, stood a woman. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that draped off her shoulders and cascaded to the floor in waves that shimmered as if the fabric had been woven from starlight. It was custom maternity couture, designed not to hide her 8-month pregnant belly, but to celebrate it, to transform it from a condition into a coronation. The gown cinched above the curve and flowed below it in architectural folds that made her look like a Renaissance painting come to life. Around her neck hung a sapphire necklace that blazed with blue fire under the chandeliers, a stone so large and so pure that 3 jewelers in the room would later argue about its provenance, and none of them would be correct about its value. She descended the stairs alone. She did not need an escort. Her left hand rested on the banister with the lightness of a woman who could walk this staircase in the dark. Her right hand cradled her belly. Not out of weakness, not out of discomfort. She held it the way a queen carries the crown jewels, with certainty and pride. Every step was measured, deliberate, regal. Robert Donovan reached the bottom of the stairs as she did. He bowed. actually bowed. He took her hand, and his voice, the voice of a man who commanded a multi-billion-dollar empire, trembled slightly as it carried across the hushed ballroom. "Miss Gray Kavanaugh, we are truly honored. We did not expect you to attend in person. I felt it was important to oversee my new investments personally, Robert," she said. Her voice was clear and melodic, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume to fill a room. The crowd parted for her as she walked into the ballroom. She was the sun, and everyone else was debris in her orbit. Men who ran hedge funds stepped aside. Women who chaired boards lowered their champagne glasses. A photographer from the Tribune pressed his shutter so rapidly it sounded like a hummingbird's wings. Sienna gripped Bennett's arm. Her fingernails dug through his suit jacket and into the flesh beneath. "Who is that?" she hissed. Bennett could not speak. His mouth was open. His brain had short-circuited, because walking toward him, glowing under the light of 1,000 crystals, 8 months pregnant with his child, was the woman he had called invisible. The woman he had mocked for shopping at Goodwill. The woman whose baby he had called an anchor. The woman he had forced to sign divorce papers while standing in his office in a stretched sweater and old jeans. The woman he had told to leave her key on the desk and never come back. Ellison stopped 3 feet away from Bennett and Sienna. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She simply arrived. The way a tide arrives, inevitable and unhurried. Up close, the transformation was staggering. The frizzy ponytail was gone, replaced by a sleek, dark cascade of hair that fell over her shoulders like water. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a vitality that radiated from her skin like warmth from a fire. The stretched sweater was gone, replaced by midnight blue velvet and a sapphire that would have made an empress jealous. But it was her eyes that Bennett could not look away from. They were the same eyes, the same brown, the same shape. But the woman behind them was entirely different. The softness was still there, buried deep, but on the surface was something Bennett had never seen in 5 years of marriage. Authority. Power. The quiet, absolute certainty of a woman who knows exactly who she is and is no longer willing to pretend otherwise. "Hello, Bennett," Ellison said. Bennett made a sound that was half word, half gasp. "Ellison? What are you doing here?" "You look surprised," she said. "You should not be. You signed the Aurora Holdings restructuring agreement 3 days ago. You just never thought to ask who you were signing it with." The blood drained from Bennett's face so completely that he looked like a man watching his own ghost walk toward him. His mouth opened and closed twice before a sound came out. Sienna's grip on his arm had turned to a death clutch. Her face had gone the color of the white tablecloths. "She is Aurora Holdings," she said, her voice rising. "Your ex-wife? The one in the sweatpants?" Ellison turned her gaze to Sienna. The look was not angry. It was surgical. She scanned Sienna from the neon yellow dress to the spray tan, to the diamond earrings purchased on credit, to the white-knuckled grip on the martini glass. She took it all in with the calm, clinical attention of a doctor examining an X-ray, and she diagnosed the entire situation in 3 seconds. "And you must be Sienna," Ellison said. She let the word hang in the air for a beat. The upgrade. The word landed like a slap in a library. Several nearby guests turned their heads. "I have read your personnel file," Ellison continued. "Impressive marketing numbers, actually. Unfortunately, your position has been made redundant in the restructuring. Human Resources sent the termination email at 5 o'clock this afternoon. Did you not check your phone?" Sienna's composure cracked. "You cannot do that. Bennett, tell her she cannot do that." Bennett stared at the floor. His jaw was clenched so tightly, a vein pulsed at his temple. He said nothing. "He cannot tell me anything, Sienna." Ellison said calmly. "He works for me." She took one step closer to Sienna, close enough that only the three of them could hear what came next. She placed one hand on her belly, where Charlotte was kicking, and she spoke in a voice that was quiet enough to be intimate and sharp enough to draw blood. "And I want you to know something, Sienna. The words he said used to break me during the divorce. Anchor. Invisible. Goodwill. Those were not his words. He is not creative enough. That was your script. You studied me for months, and you wrote him a playbook for cruelty, and you coached him on the delivery. I know. I know everything. And I want you to think about that on the drive home tonight. Because the woman you scripted those words for is the woman who now owns the company, the building, and the future you thought you were stealing. Think about that." Sienna opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in her adult life, Sienna Drake had no words. Robert Donovan, who had been observing from a respectful distance, stepped into the circle with the practiced timing of a man who has hosted 500 events and knows exactly when to deploy security. He snapped his fingers once. Two large men in dark suits materialized from the edges of the crowd. "Bennett, Sienna," Donovan said. His voice was cold and final. "The car is waiting." Sienna pulled her arm away from Bennett and spun toward him. "You said you were the boss," she hissed. "You said you were running things. You said she was nobody. You are just her errand boy, a broke puppet in a cheap suit." "Sienna, stop," Bennett pleaded. "I am not leaving with you," Sienna spat. She looked at Ellison, then at Bennett, and something in her face shifted from anger to pure, undiluted disgust. "I am not dating a man who cannot even keep his own company. Find your own ride home." She turned and stormed toward the exit. Her canary yellow dress trailed behind her like a hazard sign, a bright streak of defeated ambition cutting through the elegant crowd. Bennett stood alone, the center of attention for every wrong reason. 500 pairs of eyes fixed on him with a mixture of pity, contempt, and the kind of secondhand embarrassment that makes people grateful they are not the ones standing in the spotlight. Ellison looked at him. There was no triumph in her expression, no gloating, just the quiet, exhausted finality of a woman who has finished a task she never wanted to begin. "Go home, Bennett. Read the employee handbook. Be at your desk at 8 a.m. We have a great deal of work to do." She turned her back on him. She took Robert Donovan's arm. "Now, Robert," she said, her voice brightening, "tell me about that senator you wanted me to meet." As Bennett walked the long, lonely path to the exit, his shoes clicking against the marble floor, in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown, the applause started behind him. It was not for him. It was for the woman he had discarded. The quiet one, the invisible one, the one who had just ascended her throne in midnight blue velvet with a sapphire blazing at her throat and a baby kicking beneath her heart. And every person in that room who watched her walk into the light understood the same thing at the same moment. True wealth does not shout, it whispers. And they had just heard it speak. Late that night, in the back of the Rolls-Royce Phantom heading north on Lakeshore Drive, Ellison Gray laughed for the first time in months. She had Maggie on speakerphone. Arthur sat in the front passenger seat, his face illuminated by the passing streetlights, his expression a careful mask of professional neutrality that could not quite hide the satisfaction beneath. "Maggie, you should have seen his face," Ellison said. She was leaning back in the leather seat, her shoes off, her feet tucked beneath her, one hand resting on her belly, where Charlotte was doing what felt like somersaults. And Sienna's dress. "Maggie, it was the color of a traffic warning sign. I am not exaggerating. You could have seen that dress from a satellite. Through the phone, Maggie's laughter was so loud and so full that Arthur visibly winced. Lord have mercy. I wish I had been there with a bucket of popcorn and a lawn chair, Maggie said. Please tell me somebody took a picture. Please tell me that yellow dress and that sorry expression are documented for posterity. Arthur, Ellison said, turning toward the front seat. Did anyone photograph the moment? Arthur cleared his throat. I believe approximately 47 photographs were taken during the relevant 60-second window, Miss Gray, several of which have already appeared on social media under hashtags that I will not repeat in polite company. Ellison laughed again. It was a real laugh. Not the polite, measured laugh she had trained herself to produce during 5 years of dinner parties with Bennett's colleagues. This was the laugh of a woman who had been holding her breath for half a decade and had finally exhaled. How do you feel, honey? Maggie asked. Ellison was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window at the dark expanse of Lake Michigan, the water invisible in the night, known only by the absence of city lights. I feel free, she said, and she pressed her hand against her belly and felt Charlotte kick. I think the worst is over, Maggie. I really think it is. In the front seat, Arthur allowed himself a small nod, but his eyes in the rearview mirror told a different story. They were watchful, vigilant. Arthur Pendleton had spent 23 years in the security business and 2 decades before that in military intelligence. He had learned a single lesson in all those years, and he had learned it so deeply that it was part of his bone marrow. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind of animal there is, and Bennett Caldwell had just been backed into the smallest corner of his life. Arthur said nothing. He watched the road. 2 hours later, Ellison was back at the St. Regis penthouse. She had changed out of the midnight blue gown and into a soft cotton robe that she had owned since graduate school. A garment that Grandmother Catherine would have thrown into the fireplace if she had seen it. She sat at her desk with a cup of chamomile tea, the city glittering below, and opened a video call to Geneva. Catherine's face appeared on the screen. She was in her library. As always, a book open on her lap, her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. When she saw Ellison's face, she smiled. It was a rare thing, Catherine's smile. It transformed her entire face, softening decades of authority into something that looked almost girlish. Your grandfather would have loved tonight, Catherine said. He always said the best revenge is living so well that your enemies choke on their own envy. Ellison laughed. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Grandmother, I wish you could have seen it. When Bennett realized who I was, when Sienna tried to speak and nothing came out, when Robert Donovan bowed to me in front of 500 people. I wish you could have been there. I was there, Catherine said, in spirit, and I heard every detail from Arthur's report. He texted me during the event. He is surprisingly good at texting for a man his age. They talked for another 20 minutes. About the restructuring, about the Donovan integration timeline, about the nursery that Ellison was preparing for Charlotte, about names for the teddy bear Maggie had sent. And then it happened. Ellison was mid-sentence, something about the color she had chosen for the nursery walls. When the pain hit, it was sudden, sharp, and deep. Not in her belly, but lower, a white-hot lance of agony that made her gasp and grip the edge of the desk so hard her knuckles went white. Grandmother, she choked. Ellison? Catherine leaned forward, her smile gone, replaced by an expression of immediate, razor-sharp concern. Ellison, what is wrong? Ellison looked down. Blood, a small but unmistakable stain spreading on the cotton of her robe, dark against the white fabric, impossible to deny. Oh God, she whispered. Oh God, no. Not now. Not tonight. Arthur was through the door in 4 seconds. He had been stationed in the adjacent room, as he always was when Ellison was in residence, and the sound of her gasp had triggered an instinct honed by decades of crisis response. He took one look at her face, one look at the blood, and he was already on the phone. Northwestern Memorial, maternity emergency. We are 7 minutes out. Have a team standing by. The next 45 minutes were a blur of sirens, sterile corridors, fluorescent lights, and the relentless beeping of machines. Ellison was rushed to the maternity ward at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, where a team of 3 doctors and 2 nurses surrounded her with the kind of controlled urgency that is more frightening than panic, because it means the professionals are genuinely scared. Pre-eclampsia. The doctors used the word calmly, but Ellison could see the concern in their eyes. Her blood pressure was dangerously elevated. The sustained stress of the past weeks, the divorce, the restructuring, the gala, the emotional weight of confronting Bennett had taken a toll that her body could no longer absorb. The baby was at risk. Ellison lay on the hospital bed, alone under the buzzing fluorescent lights, her hand on her belly, monitors beeping on both sides of her like a mechanical heartbeat. She was terrified in a way she had never been terrified before. Not of losing money, not of losing the company, not of Bennett or Sienna or any of the human threats that populated her waking hours. She was terrified of losing Charlotte, of losing the one thing in the world that money could not buy and power could not protect. Please, she whispered to no one and everyone. Take everything I have, every dollar, every company, every building, and every stock, and every trust. Take all of it. Just save my baby. Please, just save her. Maggie arrived 20 minutes later. She burst through the hospital room door, still wearing her flour-dusted apron from the bakery, because when the phone had rung and Arthur's voice had said the words hospital and emergency, Maggie had not even paused to take the apron off. She had run to her car, driven 11 miles over the speed limit, and talked her way past 3 nurses by sheer force of Southern determination. She took Ellison's hand and held it with both of hers. You listen to me, she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. This little girl is a gray. She held on through 5 years of that man's cruelty. She held on through tonight. She held on through everything this world has thrown at you. She is not going anywhere, Ellison. Do you hear me? She is not going anywhere. The doctors stabilized Ellison over the next 2 hours. The blood pressure came down. The bleeding stopped. Charlotte's heartbeat, monitored through a device strapped to Ellison's belly, remained strong and steady. A rapid, insistent drumbeat that said, I am here. I am not leaving. But the verdict was severe. Strict bed rest, the lead doctor said, a woman named Dr. Patterson who had kind eyes and a voice that brooked no argument. No travel, no stress, no leaving this hospital room for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer. Your body has been under extreme sustained stress, and it has reached its limit, Miss Gray. If we push further, we risk a premature delivery with serious complications. You need to rest. That is not a suggestion. It is a medical order. Ellison stared at the ceiling. The triumph of the gala, which had felt so total and so final just hours ago, evaporated like morning fog. I cannot run a restructuring from a hospital bed, Maggie, she said. The board meetings, the SIEC filings, the Donovan integration. Everything is happening in the next 2 weeks, and I am lying here connected to machines. Maggie squeezed her hand. Arthur can handle the business, honey. That man has been running things behind the scenes since before you were born. Your job right now is not to be a CEO. Your job right now is to grow that baby. Everything else can wait. Ellison closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her cheek and fell onto the hospital pillow. She had won the battle tonight. She had stood at the top of those stairs and shown the world who she was. She had watched Bennett's face collapse. She had watched Sienna's bravado shatter like cheap glass. And now, 2 hours later, she was flat on her back in a hospital bed, unable to move, unable to fight, unable to do anything except lie still and pray that her body would hold together long enough for her daughter to arrive safely. The first false victory was over, and the real war was about to begin. 3 days passed in the hospital room. On the morning of the third day, Maggie arrived with a brown paper bag from the bakery, homemade chicken soup in a thermos, and a small stuffed bear with a ribbon around its neck. "I could not find a bear wearing a tiny business suit," Maggie said, setting the bag on the bedside table. "But I figure Charlotte can accessorize when she is older." Ellison smiled. It was a small smile, tired around the edges, but genuine. She was propped up in the hospital bed with pillows, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, the heart monitor beeping steadily beside her. She looked fragile in a way that would have been unimaginable to the 500 people who had watched her descend the staircase at the Palmer house 3 nights ago. Maggie pulled up a chair, opened the thermos, and poured soup into a paper cup. She handed it to Ellison and then settled in with the comfortable familiarity of a woman who had spent decades perfecting the art of sitting with people in difficult moments. They did not talk about the company. They did not talk about Bennett or Sienna or the board or the SEC filings that were piling up on Arthur's desk. They talked about nothing. They talked about everything. Maggie told a story about a customer who had come into the bakery that morning and ordered a cake shaped like a divorce decree. She wanted me to write "Free at Last" in buttercream across the top, Maggie said. With little fondant handcuffs on the bottom tier that were supposed to be breaking apart. I told her I would do it, but the handcuffs would cost extra because my piping skills are not what they used to be. Ellison laughed. It was the first real laugh she had produced since the hospital, and it felt like a window opening in a room that had been closed too long. Maggie reached over and placed her hand on Ellison's belly. She felt the baby move, a gentle, rolling motion beneath the skin. "This little girl is already tougher than her daddy," Maggie said softly. She held on. Ellison covered Maggie's hand with her own. "Maybe the worst is over," she whispered. Maggie looked at her friend. Her eyes were warm, but her expression carried the faint shadow of a woman who has lived long enough to know that saying "maybe the worst is over" is the surest way to invite the worst back in. "Maybe it is, honey," Maggie said. "Maybe it is." It was not. While Ellison rested in her hospital bed with a stuffed bear and a cup of chicken soup, Bennett Caldwell was in his apartment in Chicago, pacing the length of his living room like a caged animal. The gala had broken something in him, not his spirit. That was too strong a word for whatever Bennett's spirit was made of. What it had broken was his belief in his own invulnerability. For the first time in his adult life, Bennett had been publicly humiliated. He had been escorted out of his own party. He had watched 500 people turn their backs on him and applaud the woman he had discarded. He had stood on the sidewalk outside the Palmer house in his red tie and his expensive shoes, completely alone, while his girlfriend screamed at him in front of valets and then vanished into a taxi. The humiliation burned. It burned worse than the financial exposure, worse than the loss of control. The image of Ellison descending that staircase, magnificent and pregnant, while Robert Donovan bowed to her, that image was seared into his brain like a brand. He had not slept in 3 days. He had consumed approximately 9 pots of coffee and 2 bottles of wine, which was a violation of the new company policy prohibiting executive alcohol consumption. But Bennett had stopped caring about company policy the moment he realized the company was no longer his. And then Sienna came back. She appeared at his door, 48 hours after the gala. She wore sunglasses and a coat pulled tight, the uniform of a woman who does not want to be recognized, though in truth, nobody was looking for her. She was not carrying a suitcase. She was carrying information. Sienna did not return out of love. She did not return because she missed Bennett or because the gala had triggered some revelation about the depth of their connection. Sienna returned because she had spent 48 hours in her hotel room Googling the Grey Dynasty, and what she found had made her pupils dilate with the kind of hunger that has nothing to do with food. Aurora Holdings was the tip of an iceberg that went down to the floor of the ocean. The Covenant Grey Trust controlled assets that made the fortunes of everyone at the Donovan Gala look like pocket change. And the woman who controlled that trust was currently lying in a hospital bed, unable to move. "She is stuck in a hospital bed, Bennett," Sienna said. She stood in his kitchen, with her arms crossed and her eyes burning with the focused intensity of a woman who has identified an opportunity and will not let it pass. She cannot run anything from there. The board, the SEC filings, the Donovan integration. She is pinned down. "This is our window." Bennett looked at her from across the counter. "Our window for what?" Sienna smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. To take it back, all of it. She explained the plan. When Arthur's team had revoked her official company credentials after the gala, they had caught her primary login, her email access, her file sharing permissions. Standard procedure, but Sienna had not survived 2 decades in corporate America by keeping only one key to the building. 6 months ago, when she was still VP of Marketing, she had created a secondary admin login under a dummy name to manage a marketing analytics dashboard. It was a minor system access point, barely visible in the IT architecture, the kind of backdoor that exists in thousands of companies across America because nobody thinks to audit the marketing department. What Sienna did not know, and what would eventually prove to be her undoing, was that Arthur's cybersecurity team had found the backdoor on the very first day of the restructuring audit. They had mapped every access point, every credential, every digital fingerprint in the Caldwell and Associates network. They found Sienna's secondary login on day 1, and Arthur had made a decision. He did not close it. He left it open, deliberately, because Arthur Pendleton understood something that Sienna Drake, for all her cunning, had never learned. The most effective trap is not a locked door. It is an open one that leads exactly where you want your prey to go. Arthur was watching every keystroke in real time, 24 hours a day. Over the next 5 days, Sienna used her backdoor access to pull confidential restructuring documents from the Caldwell and Associates servers, financial projections, board meeting minutes, legal correspondence between Arthur's team and the SEC. She compiled everything into a dossier that she and Bennett would use as ammunition. Then Bennett made his move. He contacted Robert Donovan privately, requesting a meeting under the pretense of discussing merger timeline concerns. He sat in Donovan's office in his red tie with his confident smile, and he lied with the same smooth proficiency that had once charmed investors out of millions. He told Donovan that Ellison was mentally unstable, that the pregnancy had triggered a psychological episode, that her behavior at the gala was evidence of an irrational and potentially dangerous mind controlling a major financial entity. He showed Donovan emails, carefully doctored by Sienna, that appeared to show Ellison making erratic demands, approving reckless expenditures, and threatening board members. "Between you and me, Robert," Bennett said, leaning forward with an expression of rehearsed concern, "I am worried about her, and I am worried about our merger. Aurora Holdings is a vanity project run by a woman who is not well. We need to take steps to protect the company before she destroys it." Donovan listened. He said little. His face revealed nothing. He thanked Bennett for his concern and showed him the door. Bennett then filed a formal motion with the Caldwell and Associates Board of Directors to invoke an incapacity clause. The motion argued that Ellison's hospitalization rendered her unable to fulfill her duties as controlling shareholder, and that her voting proxy should be temporarily suspended pending a medical evaluation. He had spent 3 days secretly cultivating 2 of the 7 board members. He had promised them favorable stock allocations in the post-merger structure. He had implied that Aurora Holdings was unstable and that aligning with him was the safer bet. The vote was held by emergency teleconference on a Tuesday afternoon while Ellison lay in her hospital bed with Maggie reading to her from a novel about a woman who moves to the English countryside and opens a bookshop. The motion passed 4-3. Ellison's proxy was suspended. Arthur delivered the news in person. He walked into the hospital room with his face set in the expression of controlled fury that Ellison had seen exactly twice in 23 years. They voted to suspend your proxy, Miss Gray. Bennett convinced 2 board members to flip. The motion passed 4-3. He is now filing with the SEC to challenge the Aurora acquisition as fraudulent, claiming you misrepresented your mental fitness. Ellison tried to sit up. The heart monitor spiked. Maggie, who had been reading in the chair beside the bed, dropped the book and put both hands on Ellison's shoulders. You stay in that bed, Ellison Gray, Maggie said. Her voice left no room for discussion. That baby needs you alive more than you need to fight that man today. Ellison sank back against the pillows. The tears came, not the composed tears of the gala or the frightened tears of the curb. These were the helpless tears of a woman who had run out of places to stand. He is taking everything, Maggie, she whispered, and I cannot even stand up. And now Bennett escalated further. A financial blog called Capital Insider published a devastating article 2 days later. The headline read, Aurora Holdings, a vanity project by an unstable heiress. The article questioned Ellison's mental fitness in detail. It implied that her pregnancy was being used as a shield against scrutiny. It suggested that the Gray dynasty was a paper empire propped up by old money and no real substance. It cited anonymous sources within Caldwell and Associates who described Ellison as erratic, paranoid, and potentially delusional. The article was paid for through an offshore account managed by one of Sienna's contacts. The anonymous sources were Bennett and Sienna themselves. Every word was a lie designed to burn. The stock dropped 12% overnight. 2 major institutional clients threatened to pull their investments. Board members who had voted to support Ellison began calling Arthur in a panic. Ellison watched the news coverage from her hospital bed. The headlines scrolled across every financial channel on the mounted television, the words repeating in an endless loop that felt like a fist tightening around her chest. She picked up her phone and called Geneva. When Catherine answered, Ellison's voice was small, smaller than it had been on the curb in the rain, smaller than it had been during the divorce. This was the voice of a woman at the very bottom of the well, looking up and seeing nothing but dark. Grandmother, I failed. He is winning. He is destroying everything, and I cannot even get out of this bed. Catherine Gray was silent for 3 full seconds. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 84 years and the authority of a woman who had built a $1 trillion empire from the deck of a fishing boat. Ellison. Listen to me. Your grandfather built this dynasty from nothing. A single boat and a dream during the worst economic catastrophe in American history. He was told he was finished 100 times. By bankers, by competitors, by the weather. Do you know what he always said? What? He said the storm is not your enemy, Ellison. Your enemy is the voice inside you that says the storm will never end. Catherine leaned closer to the camera. Her eyes, behind her gold-rimmed glasses, were blazing. That baby you are carrying is a gray, and grays do not break. We bend. We bleed. We get knocked flat on our backs in hospital beds, but we do not break. Now stop crying. Call Arthur. And fight from that bed like the general you were born to be. Ellison hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling for exactly 90 seconds. Then she pressed the call button and asked the nurse for a second pillow, a phone charger, and permission to use her laptop. The nurse, who had been instructed by Dr. Patterson that Miss Gray was to have minimal stress, looked uncertain. The stress of lying here, doing nothing while someone destroys my company, is worse than the stress of fighting back, Ellison said. I promise you I will not leave this bed, but I need my computer. The nurse brought the computer. Maggie, who had been watching this exchange from the chair by the window, set down her novel and stood up. What do you need, honey? I need you to go to the gift shop downstairs and buy every phone charger they have. I need you to call Arthur and tell him to get up here with a secure laptop and a pot of real coffee, not this hospital decaf. And Maggie? Yes? Thank you for being here, for all of it. Maggie squeezed her hand. Honey, I have been waiting 5 years to watch you do this. I am not going to miss it now. I will be back in 10 minutes with chargers and coffee. You start planning. Within the hour, Ellison's hospital room had been transformed into a command center. Arthur had arrived with 2 secure laptops, a mobile hotspot, 3 encrypted satellite phones, and a leather briefcase containing the complete Caldwell and Associates financial dossier. He set everything up on the rolling hospital tray table with the methodical precision of a man assembling a field headquarters. Maggie had returned with 6 phone chargers, a pot of coffee she had somehow convinced the hospital cafeteria to brew at double strength, and a bag of chocolate chip cookies from her own bakery that she had stashed in her car for exactly this kind of emergency. The heart monitor beeped steadily beside the bed. The lights of Chicago glittered beyond the hospital window, and Ellison Gray, 8 months pregnant, in a hospital gown and a robe, with an IV line in her left arm and a laptop balanced on her belly, went to war. Her first call was to Robert Donovan. She did not beg. She did not explain. She did not appeal to his sympathy, or their shared history, or the fact that his family and hers had been business allies for 30 years. She simply sent him one document through a secure email link and asked him to open it. The document was the full, unredacted financial audit of Caldwell and Associates. But it was not just the audit of Bennett's fraud, the pension embezzlement, the shell companies, the offshore accounts. That was old news. Donovan had seen those numbers already. What was new was the forensic analysis of the emails Bennett had shown Donovan 3 days ago. The ones that supposedly proved Ellison was erratic and unstable. Arthur's team had deconstructed the emails line by line. The timestamps were wrong. The metadata showed they had been created on a laptop registered to Sienna Drake, not on Ellison's devices. The IP addresses were inconsistent. The language patterns, analyzed by a linguistic forensics expert the Gray dynasty kept on retainer, did not match Ellison's writing style. They matched Sienna's. In short, the emails were forgeries, and the forensic proof was irrefutable. Donovan read the document in silence. When he spoke, his voice was colder than Ellison had ever heard it. That little weasel sat in my office and lied to my face, Donovan said. He showed me fabricated evidence and asked me to help him steal your company. I will testify to that under oath if it comes to it. Thank you, Robert. I am going to need that. Her second call was to the 2 board members who had flipped. She did not threaten. She did not raise her voice. She presented them with a very simple reality. They had voted to suspend her proxy based on Bennett's motion. Bennett's motion was supported by fabricated evidence. By voting with him, they had functionally endorsed a fraudulent filing. If the SEC investigated, and the SEC would investigate, their votes would be part of the record. They would be named as co-conspirators, not because Ellison would name them, because the evidence would. She gave them a choice. Reverse your vote by end of business today, and you will be remembered as board members who corrected an error when presented with new evidence. That is an honorable narrative. The alternative narrative is considerably less comfortable. I will let you decide which story you prefer to tell. They flipped back within 40 minutes. Both of them. The proxy suspension was reversed. Ellison's voting authority was restored. Her third move was strategic rather than defensive. She instructed Arthur to leak the real restructuring financials, the accurate ones, to 3 carefully selected Wall Street analysts. Not the entire dossier, just enough. The fact that Aurora Holdings had injected $200 million in new capital. The fact that the employee pension fund, which Bennett had gutted, had been quietly and fully restored. The fact that the Sentinel algorithm, the crown jewel of the Caldwell technology portfolio, was performing 18% above projections in beta testing. The analysts published their assessments. Within hours, the stock began to recover. By the following morning, it had regained 9 of the 12% it had lost. Maggie brought soup. She set the thermos on the tray table next to the laptop and the encrypted phone and the stack of legal documents. You just ran a corporate war from a hospital bed in a nightgown, Maggie said. She was grinning. Your grandmother would be proud. Heck, I am proud. And I barely know what half those words mean. Ellison smiled. She closed the laptop. She leaned back against the pillows and placed both hands on her belly. Charlotte was kicking, 3 quick thumps in a row, the rhythm that Ellison had come to think of as her daughter's applause. We did it, baby girl, Ellison whispered. We are safe. She closed her eyes. The monitors beeped. The coffee grew cold on the tray. For the first time in days, she slept. She did not know that while she slept, Bennett and Sienna were in Bennett's apartment on the other side of the city, planning the most destructive act of their partnership. She did not know that Sienna was pacing the living room like a predator, her mind working through angles and vulnerabilities with the focused cruelty of a woman who has decided to burn a house down because she cannot own it. She did not know that the second false victory was about to be shattered by a bomb, not a physical bomb, something worse, a digital one. Hidden inside the one piece of technology that made Caldwell and Associates worth anything at all, and rigged to detonate in a way that would send Ellison to prison and take Charlotte away from her arms. Bennett was pacing. The board had flipped back. Donovan was not returning his calls. The stock was recovering. Every move he had made in the past week had been countered, neutralized, and turned against him. He was running out of moves, and he knew it. Sienna sat on his couch, with her legs crossed and a glass of wine in her hand. She had been quiet for 20 minutes, which was unusual for Sienna. When Sienna went quiet, it meant she was thinking. And when Sienna was thinking, the world should be afraid. We need something bigger, she said finally, something she cannot recover from, something that does not just hurt her, something that ends her. What is bigger than taking the board? Bennett asked. We kill the product. Bennett stopped pacing. He turned to look at her. What? The Sentinel algorithm. It is the only reason this company has any value. Without it, the stock is worthless. The merger is dead. Ellison loses everything. Bennett shook his head. That is insane, Sienna. That is our own company. If the algorithm crashes, I lose everything too. Sienna set down her wineglass. She looked at him with an expression that contained no warmth, no affection, no pretense of partnership, just pure surgical calculation. "It is not our company, Bennett. It is her company. She made that very clear at the gala. You are a figurehead, a puppet, remember? That is what I called you on the sidewalk, and I was right. So the question is not whether we destroy the company. The question is whether we destroy it on our terms or let her bury us on hers." She walked to his laptop. She opened it. "I still have system access," she said. "My secondary admin login. Arthur's team never found it." She was wrong about that last part, but she would not learn that for several more weeks. Sienna outlined the plan while Bennett stood by the window and felt the last traces of his conscience flicker like a candle in a draft. They would use her backdoor access to reach the source code repository for the Sentinel algorithm. Bennett knew the architecture better than anyone. He had helped design it. He would write the logic bomb, a few dozen lines of malicious code buried deep in the subroutines that would cause the entire system to crash catastrophically once the user base exceeded 10 million, a milestone. The company was expected to hit within 3 months of going public. The crash would look like a technical failure, not sabotage. The stock would collapse. The merger would die. Investors would flee. But that was not the genius of the plan. That was just the detonation. The genius was the framing. Sienna would plant a false evidence trail using Ellison's compromised proxy credentials from the brief period when the board had suspended her access. She would make it look like Ellison herself had inserted the malicious code, routing the digital fingerprints through the access points that had been temporarily linked to Ellison's account during the suspension. When the bomb went off and the investigators came looking, every piece of digital evidence would point to one person, Ellison Gray. "When this goes off," Sienna said, her voice flat and matter-of-fact, "she does not just lose money. She goes to prison. For corporate sabotage, for wire fraud, for conspiracy. And with a newborn baby, Child Protective Services takes Charlotte. Ellison loses everything. The company, the fortune, the reputation, and the baby." Bennett was staring out the window. His hands were shaking, not with fear, but with the toxic energy of a man standing at the edge of a cliff and looking down. "The baby Sienna," he said. His voice was almost a whisper. She is my... He could not finish the sentence. He had called Charlotte an anchor. He had questioned her paternity. He had told Ellison to try not to have the baby in the Honda Civic. But somewhere, beneath the layers of ego and cruelty and self-interest, a single nerve remained, a single thread connecting him to the biological fact that there was a child in the world who carried his DNA. Sienna killed it. "You're what?" she said. Her voice was ice. "Your anchor? That is what you called her, remember? Are you going soft on me now, Bennett? Because if you are, I can walk out that door and you can wait for her to bury you. Your choice." Bennett closed his eyes. He took a breath. He opened his eyes. He sat down at the laptop. He began to type. He worked through the night, line by line by line. The code was elegant in its malice, a masterpiece of destruction written by a man who knew the system's architecture the way a surgeon knows the body he is about to cut open. He buried the payload so deep in the subroutines that a standard code review would never find it. It was a time bomb with a digital fuse, dormant until the user count crossed the threshold, and then catastrophic. Sienna handled the framing. She was meticulous. She rerouted the access logs through 3 different proxy servers, layered the false trail through Ellison's compromised credentials, and time-stamped every fabricated entry to align with the window of the proxy suspension. It was sophisticated work, the work of a woman who had spent years learning how to cover tracks, because she had spent years making tracks that needed covering. When it was done, Bennett pressed enter. The screen flashed confirmation. The payload was embedded. Sienna then picked up a burner phone purchased at a gas station in the suburbs. She had sent Bennett to buy it 2 days earlier. He had used his personal credit card because Sienna had told him cash would look suspicious if the purchase was ever reviewed. She did not mention that credit card records are easier to trace than cash. She did not need to. She was already hedging her bets, building a trail that led to Bennett if anything went wrong, keeping her own hands clean enough to plead ignorance. She typed a text message to a financial crimes reporter she had identified weeks ago. The message read, "The Grey Dynasty heiress is sabotaging her own company for an insurance payout. Check the source code commits on the Sentinel algorithm. Follow the digital trail. It goes straight to Ellison Gray." She pressed send. They toasted with champagne. Bennett's hand was not steady, but the champagne helped. They believed they had won. They believed the bomb would detonate in 3 months and blow Ellison Gray and her billion-dollar baby kingdom into dust. What they did not know, what they could not have known, was that Arthur Pendleton was sitting in a security office on the 45th floor of the Caldwell building, watching a bank of monitors that displayed every keystroke from every terminal in the building. He had been watching Bennett type for 6 hours. He had watched Sienna route the false evidence trail. He had watched them purchase the burner phone because the gas station where Bennett bought it had a security camera that Arthur had accessed through a contact in the Chicago Police Department 4 hours after the transaction. Every line of code, every fabricated timestamp, every digital fingerprint, logged, authenticated, and stored on a secure server in Geneva. Arthur picked up his phone and dialed Ellison's hospital room. It was 3 in the morning. "Miss Gray," he said when she answered, "I apologize for the hour, but we have a situation and a decision to make." "What happened?" "They took the bait. Both of them. Everything is on record." Arthur paused. "I left the door open, Miss Gray, and they walked through it, exactly as I expected. We have everything we need to end this permanently. But the FBI will need to be involved, and we will need to move quickly. There is a reporter with a tip that could complicate things if it publishes before we act." Ellison was silent for a long moment. In the background, the heart monitor beeped. Outside the hospital window, the first gray light of dawn was touching the Chicago skyline. "How long do we have?" 48 hours before the article goes to print." "Then we have 48 hours, Ellison said. "Call the FBI, Arthur, and call grandmother. Tell her the Grays are going to war one last time." Charlotte. Catherine Gray was born on a Tuesday. She arrived at 36 weeks, 2 weeks early, her entrance into the world triggered by the same stress that had defined the weeks before it. But she came screaming, which the doctor said was a very good sign, and she weighed 6 pounds and 2 ounces, which the doctor said was strong for her gestational age, and she had a full head of dark hair, which Maggie said was clearly from Ellison's side of the family, because Bennett did not have enough character to produce good hair. Ellison held her daughter for the first time in the quiet hours of a Tuesday morning. The hospital room dim, the monitors softly beeping, the city of Chicago glittering beyond the window like a promise. Charlotte's face was red and squished and perfect. Her hands were impossibly small, her fingers curled into fists the size of walnuts. She had Bennett's eyes, though Ellison would not realize this for several weeks, and she had Ellison's mouth, which Maggie noticed immediately. "Hello, Charlotte," Ellison whispered. She was crying, not from pain and not from sadness, from something so much larger than either of those things that there is no single word for it in the English language. "I am your mama. And I promise you, no one is ever going to make you feel invisible, not for one single day of your life. You are seen, baby girl. You are loved, and you are a gray." Maggie sat in the chair beside the bed, weeping openly and making no attempt to hide it. She held one of Charlotte's tiny feet in her palm and laughed through her tears. Arthur stood outside the door. Through the small window, Ellison could see him in the hallway, rigid and upright as always, his hands clasped behind his back. But she also saw him remove his glasses and turn his face toward the wall for a moment. When he turned back, his eyes were red. He replaced his glasses, straightened his tie, and resumed his post. He would later deny that this had happened. In Geneva, Grandmother Catherine listened on an open phone line. She had been connected since the labor began. 12 hours of silence, broken only by the occasional sound of her praying softly in French. When she heard Charlotte's first cry, she said a single word, "Beautiful." Then she hung up and wept in her library, alone, surrounded by books and photographs, and the memory of a husband who would have given anything to see this day. For 3 days, the world was small and warm and safe. Ellison held Charlotte. Maggie brought food. Arthur stood guard. The sun rose and set and rose again, and the outside world, with its stock prices and SEC filings and ticking digital bombs, felt very far away. On the third day, it came crashing back. Arthur entered the St. Regis penthouse at 9 in the morning. Ellison was in the nursery, feeding Charlotte in a rocking chair by the window. She wore a soft robe and no makeup. She looked exhausted and radiant at the same time, the way all new mothers look, as if their bodies have been hollowed out and refilled with something stronger. Arthur's face told her everything before he opened his mouth. She had known him for 23 years. She could read him the way a sailor reads the sky. "How bad?" she asked. Arthur closed the nursery door. He sat in the chair across from her and spoke in the quiet, precise voice he reserved for situations that were serious enough to require absolute clarity. He told her about the logic bomb. He told her about the false evidence trail. He told her about the anonymous tip to the reporter and the 48-hour timeline. "If the article publishes before we act," he said, "you will be implicated in a federal crime. The evidence Sienna planted is sophisticated. It will take weeks to unravel in court. During those weeks, you could be arrested. Charlotte could be placed in protective custody. The dynasty's reputation would sustain damage that might take years to repair." Ellison held Charlotte closer. The baby was asleep, her breath warm and damp against Ellison's collarbone. She felt her daughter's heartbeat through her skin, rapid and steady, impossibly fragile, and impossibly strong at the same time. "How do we prove it was them?" "We already have everything, Miss Gray. Every line of code Bennett wrote was captured by our keystroke logging system, time-stamped and authenticated with his terminal ID. The false evidence trail was constructed on Sienna's laptop using her secondary admin credentials, the ones I deliberately left active. We have the burner phone purchase on Bennett's credit card and the gas station security footage showing his face. We have the metadata analysis proving the fabricated evidence was manufactured on Sienna's device. The case is airtight. You knew they would do this." Arthur was quiet for a moment. "I knew Bennett's ego would not permit him to accept defeat," he said, "and I knew Sienna was the more dangerous of the two. She is the strategist. He is the instrument. I left the door open and I waited for them to walk through it. I apologize for the anxiety this has caused you. But we needed the crime to be committed and fully documented in order for the charges to be permanent. A plan is not a crime. An executed act of sabotage is." Ellison looked at Charlotte. She thought about what Sienna had said. Child Protective Services takes the baby. She thought about waking up in a prison cell and not knowing where her daughter was. She thought about Charlotte growing up without a mother. "Call the FBI," she said. Her voice did not waver. Call them right now, and Arthur, call grandmother. Tell her this is the last battle. We are going to finish this today." It took Arthur less than 3 hours to deliver the complete evidence package to the FBI Cyber Crimes Division at the Federal Building in downtown Chicago. He arrived with 2 flash drives, a bound legal summary, and a forensic report prepared by the Gray Dynasty's private security firm that was so comprehensive and so meticulously documented that the lead FBI agent, a woman named Sandra Chen, who had investigated corporate fraud cases for 18 years, later told her colleagues it was the most thorough private evidence submission she had ever seen. Arthur did not gloat. He did not editorialize. He presented the evidence, answered their questions, and left his contact information. Then he returned to the St. Regis to execute the final phase. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Bennett received a phone call from Arthur at 2 in the afternoon. Arthur's voice was professional and urgent. There was an emergency board meeting at the Four Seasons Hotel. The Donovan merger timeline had accelerated, and there were technical questions about the Sentinel algorithm that only Bennett could answer. His expertise was critical. The meeting was at 4 p.m. sharp. Bennett's ego could not resist. The idea that he was still essential, still needed, still the irreplaceable technical genius at the heart of the machine was more intoxicating than any scotch. He put on his red tie, checked his hair in the mirror, and drove to the Four Seasons. Sienna received a separate call, a meeting with Aurora Holdings' new chief marketing officer to discuss a possible reinstatement. The meeting was at the Four Seasons as well, but on a different floor. Sienna's ambition could not resist. She arrived 20 minutes early. At 4 p.m., Bennett walked into the conference room on the 32nd floor of the Four Seasons Hotel. It was the same room where he had first met Arthur, the same mahogany table, the same view of Central Park. Arthur was there, standing by the window. Robert Donovan sat at the table, his face set in an expression of controlled fury. The company's chief technology officer sat at a laptop connected to the large screen on the wall. 2 men in navy blue windbreakers stood near the door. They wore badges on lanyards around their necks. Bennett's eyes went to the badges first, then to the windbreakers, then to the letters printed on them, FBI. The color left his face. "What is this?" Bennett asked. His voice cracked on the second word. "Please sit," Arthur said. Bennett sat. He had no choice. His legs would not have held him if he had tried to remain standing. The CTO tapped a key. The large screen lit up. And there it was. Every line of code Bennett had typed on his terminal over the past 7 days, displayed in real-time playback. His employee ID in the corner, his terminal number, the timestamps, line by line by line. The logic bomb he had written materialized on the screen like a confession written in fire. The room was silent except for the clicking of the keyboard replay and the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. Then the CTO switched to a second file, security camera footage from a gas station in suburban Chicago. The image was grainy but unmistakable. Bennett Caldwell, in his expensive coat, purchasing a prepaid burner phone with his personal credit card. The timestamp in the corner of the footage matched the timestamp of the anonymous text message sent to the reporter. Then a third file. The metadata analysis of the fabricated evidence trail. Every false digital fingerprint, every doctored timestamp, every manufactured access log traced back to Sienna Drake's laptop. The forensic proof was irrefutable. The fabrication was complete, and it was documented down to the pixel. Bennett sat in his chair and watched his crimes play out on screen like a movie about someone else's life. His hands were on the table. They were shaking so badly that the table vibrated. Ellison, he choked. Please, I was angry. I was not thinking. The baby. I did not mean to. I never wanted to. Please. Arthur picked up his phone. He placed it on the table and dialed a number on speakerphone. The room heard 2 rings, then a click, then a voice, calm, clear, absolute. Hello, Bennett. In the background, barely audible, a baby fussed softly, a tiny sound. The sound of a newborn adjusting to the world. Bennett heard it. He heard his daughter, the child he had called an anchor, the child whose paternity he had questioned, the child he had been willing to let Child Protective Services take away so that he could destroy her mother. She was right there, on the other end of the line, and he could not touch her. You called our daughter an anchor, Ellison said, through the speaker. You tried to destroy a company that employs 3,000 people. You planted evidence to frame me for a federal crime. And you would have let them take Charlotte from me. You would have let strangers take our baby girl from her mother's arms so you could win. The baby cooed. The sound cut through the conference room like a blade. I spent 5 years loving you, Bennett. I paid your student loans. I worked 2 jobs so you could take unpaid internships. I washed your clothes and cooked your meals and held your hand when you were scared. I carried your child while you mocked me for wearing the wrong sweater to your office party. You never once asked about my family. You never once asked why I had no photographs of my parents. You never once asked where I came from or who my people were. Because you did not care. You only cared about what I looked like standing next to you. And when I did not look expensive enough, you threw me away. She paused. The monitors in the penthouse beeped. Charlotte made a soft gurgling sound. All you had to do was be kind, Bennett. That was the only test, and you failed it every single day. The FBI agents stepped forward. Bennett Caldwell, the lead agent said, you are under arrest for attempted sabotage of critical financial infrastructure, fabrication of evidence, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Please stand and place your hands behind your back. Bennett stood. His legs barely held him. The agents turned him around and pulled his arms behind him. The handcuffs clicked shut with a metallic finality that sounded like a door being locked forever. As they led him toward the hallway, Bennett twisted his head back toward the phone on the table. That is my daughter, he screamed. His voice broke into something raw and animal. You cannot keep her from me. She is mine. Ellison's voice came through the speaker one final time. Steady, unbreakable, and carrying a weight that would echo in Bennett Caldwell's memory for every remaining day of his life. You kept yourself from her, Bennett. I just watched. 3 floors below, at the exact same moment, Sienna Drake walked into a conference room expecting to meet Aurora's new chief marketing officer. She had dressed for the occasion in a tailored black suit and carried her favorite handbag, a leather piece that cost $4,000 and that she considered her good luck charm. 2 female FBI agents were waiting inside. They were not dressed for a marketing meeting. Sienna Drake, the lead agent, said, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit corporate sabotage, fabrication of evidence, wire fraud, and unauthorized access to protected computer systems. You have the right to remain silent. Sienna's mouth opened. For the second time in her life, no words came out. They cuffed her with her handbag still hanging from her arm. She was led out through a service corridor so the hotel guests would not see. She screamed for a lawyer the entire way. The elevator doors closed on her voice like a curtain falling on the final act of a very expensive play. 6 months passed. The world turned. The seasons changed. The stock market rose and fell and rose again. Wars were fought in countries far away, and elections were held in countries close to home, and babies were born, and old people died, and through it all, the great machinery of human life ground forward in its ancient, indifferent rhythm. At the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville, New York, Bennett Caldwell woke up at 6 a.m., ate breakfast from a metal tray, and reported to his assigned job in the prison laundry. His hands, which had once signed million-dollar contracts and swirled aged scotch in crystal tumblers, were now rough and red and cracked from industrial detergent. His hair, which he had once styled every morning with $50 pomade, was buzzed to a quarter-inch of stubble. He wore a beige jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too large and scratched against his skin like a rebuke. He had spent the first month in shock, the second in rage, the third in a depression so deep that the prison counselor had recommended monitoring. Now, at 6 months, he was simply empty, a vessel that had been drained of everything that once filled it. Ambition, pride, cruelty, charm, leaving behind nothing but a man in a jumpsuit with cracked hands and a number where his name used to be. On a Tuesday morning, in late spring, a guard rapped a baton against the bars of his cell. "Legal visit," the guard grunted. "Move it." Bennett's heart lurched. He scrambled off his bunk and smoothed the wrinkles of his jumpsuit with hands that would not stop shaking. A legal visit. It could be his public defender, with news about the appeal. It could be a miracle. He was led down the fluorescent-lit corridor in shackles, the chains at his wrists and ankles producing a rhythm that had become the soundtrack of his diminished life. Other inmates watched him pass with dead eyes. He kept his gaze on the floor. The guard deposited him in the visitation room, a bleak space divided by thick plexiglass, with phones mounted on both sides. Bennett sat down and clasped his hands together to stop them from trembling. He looked up. He had expected his lawyer's tired face. He had expected a stack of legal documents and the flat, rehearsed phrases of a man who was paid by the hour to manage expectations. Instead, he saw Ellison. She sat on the other side of the glass, looking like a visitor from another universe. She wore a simple trench coat over a cream silk blouse. Her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders in dark waves. She wore no jewelry except a small gold pendant at her throat. She looked rested, healthy, beautiful, radiant with the kind of light that comes from within and cannot be purchased at any price. She held a photograph. Bennett picked up his receiver. His hand shook so violently he nearly dropped it. "Ellison," he said. His voice was hoarse. "You came." "I did," she said. Her voice through the phone was tinny and digitized, but the calm authority was unmistakable. "Arthur advised against it. He said you were a closed chapter, a liability best left in the past. But I owed you one last visit, one last explanation. And then I am done. Ellison, get me out of here," Bennett said. The words tumbled out in a rush, tripping over each other. "Please, you have the power. I know you do. I will sign anything. I will leave the country. I will never contact you again. I cannot survive in here. These people, they do not know who I am. They do not care. They know exactly who you are, Bennett." Ellison said softly, "You are inmate 8940. That is all you are now." The words landed like stones. Bennett slumped in his chair. Then Ellison held up the photograph. It showed Charlotte at 6 months old. She was laughing, reaching toward the camera with chubby hands, her dark hair in 2 tiny pigtails. She had Bennett's blue eyes and Ellison's mouth and the kind of joyful, unselfconscious happiness that only exists in children who know they are loved. She was being held by an older man. His face was kind and weathered, and he held Charlotte with the confident tenderness of someone who has held babies before and considers it one of life's great privileges. Bennett had never seen this man in his life. Bennett pressed his hand against the glass, his eyes fixed on the photograph, and did not move. "She looks like me," he whispered. "She does," Ellison said. His eyes shifted to the man in the photo. "Who is holding her? Someone who loves her." She did not explain. She let the silence fill the space between them, heavy and absolute. Then she reached into her bag and produced a document, a photocopy of an old legal form, the edges slightly worn. "Do you recognize this?" she asked, holding it up to the glass. Bennett squinted. "It looks like the prenup, the one I made you sign." He said the word prenup with a bitterness that tasted like rust. He remembered that day with excruciating clarity. He had been so proud, so arrogant. He had insisted on a prenuptial agreement to protect his assets, which at the time consisted of a leased BMW $12,000 in savings and the intellectual property for a software platform that did not yet have a single user. He had made Ellison sign it as a condition of the marriage, presenting it as a favor, as if allowing her into his life required legal safeguards against the possibility that she might steal his meager fortune. He had not read the addendum, the one Ellison's grandfather had insisted on, the one written in legal language so dense that Bennett's eyes had glazed over after the first paragraph. He had waved it away. He had been too busy protecting his leased sedan to notice that the other side of the agreement contained a provision that could have changed his life forever. Ellison read it aloud. Should the spouse of the beneficiary remain in the marriage for a period of 7 years and demonstrate consistent loyalty, kindness, and fidelity, during said period, the spouse shall be entitled to 50% of the non-vested trust dividends upon the 10th anniversary of the marriage, payable annually in perpetuity. Bennett's mouth went dry. The fluorescent light above him buzzed. The sounds of the prison around him, the distant shouting of guards, the slamming of cell doors, faded to a dull hum. He knew what the trust was worth now. He had spent months in his cell researching the Grey Dynasty through the prison library's limited internet access. He had seen the numbers. He had done the math. And the math had kept him awake at night, staring at the concrete ceiling. "How much?" he whispered. His voice was barely audible. Last year's dividends alone were approximately $400 million, Ellison said. She said it the way a person might say the time or the weather, casually, as a statement of fact that required no emphasis, because the number spoke for itself. Bennett felt the blood drain from his face. He felt his hands go numb. He felt the room tilt slightly, as if the floor had shifted beneath him. "If you had stayed, Bennett," Ellison continued, her eyes steady on his, her voice soft but relentless. "If you had been kind, if you had just been a decent husband and a loving father, if you had said thank you when I cooked your dinner, and I love you when I held your hand, and our baby is beautiful when I told you I was pregnant, if you had done those simple, ordinary, human things for 2 more years, you would have been worth $500 million. And it would have kept growing every year for the rest of your life. $500 million. The number hung in the air between them like a ghost. "You would not have had to work another day," Ellison said. "The cars, the houses, the private jets, the galas in Zurich, and the dinners with senators. Everything you were so desperate for. It was all waiting for you. All of it. The only price was kindness." Bennett broke. The tears he had been holding back for 6 months, the tears of a man who had lost everything and knew it was his own fault, came pouring out of him in great, racking sobs that shook his entire body. He pressed his forehead against the plexiglass and wept like a child. "Why didn't you tell me?" he choked. "Because true wealth does not shout, Bennett," Ellison said. It whispers. It waits to be discovered. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I could buy you, not for the fortune I carried in my last name. I wanted a man who would look at me in a stretched sweater and see something worth keeping, and you looked at me and saw something to throw away. She folded the document and returned it to her bag with a gesture that was slow and deliberate, the finality of a judge placing a verdict in a sealed envelope. I chose the wrong man, she said. That is my mistake. But you chose cruelty over kindness when kindness was the only thing being asked of you. That is yours, and you will have to live with it for a very long time. Why are you telling me this? Bennett wept. His voice cracked and split. To torture me? Is this your revenge? No, Ellison said. She stood up from her chair. She smoothed her coat. I am telling you so you can stop wondering. You spent your whole life keeping score, obsessed with what you were owed, with what you deserved, with what the world was supposed to give you. Now you know exactly what the score is. She paused. She looked at him through the glass one final time. Her expression was not angry. It was not cold. It was not triumphant. It was something that hurt much more than any of those things. It was the expression of a woman who has moved on. Charlotte will know who her father is when she is old enough to understand. I will not lie to her, but I will not wait for you, Bennett. And I will not come back here. This is goodbye. She hung up the phone. The line went dead. Bennett watched her walk away. Her heels clicked against the concrete floor. The sound grew fainter. Fainter. Then the heavy steel door opened, swallowed her, and slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the room and through the years that stretched ahead of him like an empty road. He sat there. The guard did not come for 5 minutes. Bennett did not move. He stared at the plexiglass where the photograph had been pressed, and he thought about $500 million. He thought about a baby with his eyes. He thought about a woman in a stretched sweater who had paid his student loans and washed his clothes and loved him without conditions for 5 years while he looked right through her. He had held the winning lottery ticket in his hand, and he had thrown it in the trash because it looked wrinkled. The guard came. Bennett stood. He walked back to his cell in chains. He sat on his bunk and stared at the gray concrete wall. He would stare at that wall for the next 8 years. And every single day, he would do the math. And every single day, the answer would be the same. Kindness would have cost him nothing, and it would have earned him everything. Outside the prison, the rain that had been threatening all morning cleared. Ellison stepped through the gates and into bright afternoon sunshine. The air tasted clean and sweet, scrubbed fresh by the passing storm. She tilted her face toward the sky and closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth on her skin. The Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting at the curb, gleaming like a dark jewel. Arthur held the rear door open. How did it go? He asked. It is done, Ellison said. She slid into the back seat. She did not look back at the prison. The past is closed. In the future, the car pulled smoothly onto the road. Ellison opened her phone and checked the quarterly report. Aurora Caldwell stock had hit an all-time high that morning. The Sentinel algorithm, cleaned and relaunched and free of Bennett's poison, was processing 15 million users worldwide. 3,000 employees had secure jobs and fully restored pensions. The Donovan merger was complete and performing above projections. She closed the report. She would read it later. Instead, she opened her photos and looked at the most recent picture of Charlotte, 6 months old, sitting in grandmother Catherine's garden in Geneva, grabbing at a butterfly with both hands, her mouth open in a circle of pure astonishment and delight. Ellison smiled. It was the truest smile she had produced in years, unguarded, unperformed, the smile of a woman who has walked through fire and found flowers on the other side. "The future looks beautiful, Arthur," she said. "Take us to the airport. It is time to go home." The car glided down the road, leaving the prison behind, a shrinking gray rectangle in the rear-view mirror, growing smaller with every passing second until it was nothing at all. 1 year later, a sunlit terrace overlooking Lake Geneva, Switzerland. Late spring. The Gray family estate. The garden was in full bloom, explosions of color tumbling down the hillside toward the lake, which sparkled in the afternoon sun like a sheet of hammered silver. Ellison sat in a cushioned garden chair, with Charlotte on her lap. Her daughter was 1 year old now, babbling in the private language of babies, grabbing at everything within reach with the determined curiosity that Grandmother Catherine said was a Gray family trait. She had Bennett's blue eyes and Ellison's dark hair and a laugh that could fill any room. Catherine sat in the chair beside them. 85 years old, a cup of Earl Grey balanced on her knee, a cashmere shawl around her shoulders, and an expression on her face that combined the sharpness of a woman who had built an empire with the softness of a great-grandmother watching her legacy play in the garden. Maggie was visiting from Chicago. She sat in a third chair, drinking sweet tea from a mason jar she had brought from home because she did not trust Swiss beverages, and complaining loudly that Swiss pastries were overrated and that the bakeries of Geneva could not hold a candle to a proper Southern kitchen. Arthur stood at a respectful distance, reviewing security reports on his tablet. He allowed himself a rare, small smile. Arthur looked up from his screen. "Miss Gray, I have several updates." "Go ahead, Arthur." "Bennett Caldwell's second appeal has been denied by the Federal Circuit Court. The 8-year sentence stands. His attorney has indicated he will not file a third appeal." Ellison nodded. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, nothing. The chapter was closed. Additionally, Arthur continued, Miss Drake's plea deal was rejected by the sentencing judge, who found it insufficient given the severity of the charges. She received 3 years at the Federal Women's Correctional Facility in Alderson, West Virginia. Maggie snorted. "I read somewhere that she tried to sell her story to People magazine from inside. Wanted to do a whole spread. Poor little rich girl's girlfriend, wrongly accused. That kind of thing." Arthur permitted himself a very small smile. They declined. Their exact response, according to my contacts, was, "Who?" Maggie threw her head back and howled with laughter so loud that Charlotte startled, looked at Maggie, and then burst into giggles herself. Because laughter is contagious even when you are 1 year old and have no idea what the joke is. Ellison turned to Maggie. "Speaking of good news, I have been meaning to tell you something." "Uh-oh," Maggie said, setting down her tea. "Whenever you say you have been meaning to tell me something, it means you have done something ridiculous and generous, and I am going to cry. I bought the building your bakery is in," Ellison said. "The whole building. The deed has been transferred to your name. It is yours, Maggie. Free and clear. No rent, no mortgage, no landlord. Yours." Maggie's face went through approximately 7 expressions in 3 seconds, cycling from shock to disbelief to understanding to gratitude to something that defied categorization, and settled finally on the specific kind of helpless, overwhelmed love that makes a 55-year-old Southern woman from Chicago burst into tears on a terrace in Switzerland. "You did not have to do that, honey," Maggie whispered. Her voice was thick and broken. Ellison reached across and took her hand. "You held my hand when I thought I was losing Charlotte. You brought me soup in a hospital gown. You sat with me in that hospital room for 11 days and told me bad jokes and read me novels and kept me from falling apart. A building is nothing compared to that, Maggie. Nothing." Maggie pulled her into a hug, careful of Charlotte between them, holding on tight, the way you hold someone who saved your life and does not even know it. Catherine watched this from her chair, with eyes that glistened behind her gold-rimmed spectacles. She waited until the embrace ended, and then she reached out and took Ellison's other hand. "I am making a change to the trust, Ellison," Catherine said. Her voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of emotion that she was too proud to name. "The loyalty clause stays. It has served its purpose. But I am adding a new provision. I am calling it the Charlotte Clause." Ellison looked at her grandmother. "Any future spouse of any gray heir must demonstrate 2 full years of consistent kindness and integrity before they are told the family name. They must love us when we look ordinary. They must prove themselves when there is nothing to gain. We will never let another Bennett Caldwell through the door." Ellison smiled. "You think of everything, grandmother." Catherine kissed Charlotte's forehead. The baby grabbed a fistful of the old woman's cashmere shawl and gurgled with satisfaction. "I learned from watching you," Catherine said. Ellison's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it. The quarterly report, Aurora Caldwell Technologies, the entity that had risen from the wreckage of Bennett's fraud, had reached an all-time high on the New York Stock Exchange. 15 million users, projected revenue growth of 22%, a partnership with the European Central Bank, 3,000 employees with secure jobs and fully funded retirement accounts. She did not open the report. She would read it later, or tomorrow, or next week. The numbers would still be there, because Charlotte had grabbed a daisy from the garden. She held it up to Ellison with a drooly, gap-toothed grin, offering it with the serious generosity of a child who believes that a flower is the most valuable thing in the world. And she was right. Ellison took the daisy. She held it in one hand and held her daughter in the other. She looked at Maggie, who was wiping her eyes with a bakery napkin. She looked at grandmother Catherine, who was feeding Charlotte pieces of soft bread with the patient, practiced hands of a woman who had built a trillion-dollar empire and considered this moment more important than all of it. She looked at Arthur, who was pretending to read his tablet, but was actually watching them with the expression of a man who has spent his entire career protecting a family and has finally seen the reason why. 3 generations of gray women, sitting in the sun, surrounded by flowers, unbreakable. "You, my love," Ellison whispered to Charlotte, pressing her lips to her daughter's dark hair, "are the only fortune that ever mattered." The lake sparkled. The garden bloomed. Charlotte laughed. And far away, in a concrete room in upstate New York, a man in a beige jumpsuit sat on the edge of a metal bunk and stared at a gray wall. He was doing the math again. He would always be doing the math, and the answer would always be the same. He had the winning lottery ticket for 5 years. He threw it away because it looked wrinkled. Bennett Caldwell spent his entire life chasing the appearance of power while holding the real thing in his hands. He mocked a woman in a cheap sweater, not knowing she owned the bank. He rejected his unborn daughter, not knowing she was the heir to an empire. He signed those divorce papers laughing, and the world signed his fate. He judged a book by its cover, and by the time he realized it was a masterpiece, he had already set it on fire. So, remember this. Be careful who you mock on your way up, because the quiet woman you just discarded might be the one who owns the building you are standing in. And she does not forget. Now, I have 2 questions for you, and I want you to really think about them. Would you have shown Bennett that photograph of Charlotte? Would you have let him see his daughter's face one last time? Or would you have let him wonder what she looks like for 8 long years? And here's the second question, the harder one. Do you think Bennett ever truly loved Ellison, even in the beginning? Or was it always, from the very first day about what she could give him. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story hit you somewhere deep, hit that like button. It really does help the channel grow. And if you have not already, subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, remember, true wealth does not shout, it whispers. And the most expensive mistake you will ever make is underestimating a quiet woman with a baby on the way. Thank you for listening. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.